your Golf Delta Yankee crossing the motorway.
Golf Delta Yankees cleared land runway 04, surface wind 05, degrees 15 knots.
Cleared land runway 04, Golf Delta Yankee.
Congratulations, that completes the final flight test for your private pilot's license.
Almost anyone from the age of 17 years onwards has the ability to become a pilot. The purpose of this video is to show you the main exercises that you will practice in the gaining of your private pilot's license. In addition, I hope you will glimpse a sense of the fun and a sense of the freedom that only a pilot knows. We'll show you a first solo, and we'll even follow a short cross-country navigation exercise. You'll see what is required for the ground examinations. And at the end of this video, we will take a look at some of the goods that are available for the private pilot to purchase. So, let's start with a look at the controls.
This is the cockpit. At first sight, the cockpit may look confusing, but in reality, it's no more complex than a sophisticated motor car. Here we have the airspeed indicator. This shows us how fast we're travelling through the air. The artificial horizon for orientation without reference to the visual horizon. The altimeter, which shows us our height or altitude. The direction indicator, showing magnetic compass heading. The vertical speed indicator giving rate of climb and rate of descent. The turn coordinator, which shows us roll, yaw and balance where the air flows evenly about the fuselage. Down here, the engine gauges indicating oil pressure, temperature and engine functions. And here the throttle quadrant. The throttle, the mixture lever, the carburetor heat control. And this is the parking brake in the on position. And these are the aircraft radios for communication and navigation. And this the RPM or power gauge. Down here, the electrical switches for such things as lights and fuel pumps. This is the fuel selector with two tanks, the right tank and the left tank. And here the flap selector. Here the trim wheel, used to relieve control column pressures during flight. The control column. Movement of the control column towards you will cause the elevator to go up, the nose of the aircraft to pitch up. Movement of the control column forward causes the elevator to go down, for the nose of the aircraft to pitch down. Rotation of the control column to the left causes the left aileron to go up, the right aileron to go down, and for the aircraft to roll, then yaw to the left, followed by spiral dive to the left. Rotation to the right causes the left aileron to go down, right aileron to go up, and for the aircraft to roll, yaw, and spiral dive to the right. For balanced flight, the rudder pedals. Movement of the pedal to the right causes the nose of the aircraft to yaw to the right, roll to the right, followed by spiral dive to the right. Movement of the pedal to the left causes the rudder to move to the left, followed by yaw to the left, roll to the left, and spiral dive to the left. The flaps. The flaps are used to alter the lift and drag generating abilities of the wings. The trim wheel, used by the pilot to relieve control column forces. By moving the trim wheel forwards or aft, the pressures on the control column can be reduced to 0. And now the throttle quadrant. The throttle. More power, throttle open. Less power, throttle closed. The mixture lever. More fuel, mixture rich. Less fuel, mixture lean, and no fuel, the idle cutoff position. The carburetor heat control. Ice can be prevented or eliminated by raising the temperature of the air entering the carburetor venturi with the carburetor heat. Hot and cold. So let's see how these controls affect the aircraft's movement in flight. Movement of the elevator will cause the aircraft to pitch, nose down, nose up, about the aircraft's lateral axis. Movement of the ailerons will cause the aircraft to roll, wing left, wing right, about the aircraft's longitudinal axis. And movement of the aircraft's rudder will cause the aircraft to yaw, left and right, about the aircraft's vertical axis.
Okay, well here we are airborne. Let's now have a look at the effects of the controls in the aircraft. First of all, the elevator. I'm now going to move the control column forward, and you'll see relative to the horizon, the nose pitches down, the horizon climbs up in the windscreen. We see a loss in height and a gain in speed. No secondary effect, no change in direction. I now move the control column towards me, and you can see the nose pitching up, up and up, horizon low in the windscreen. The aircraft gains height and loses speed, but no change in direction, no secondary effect. Let's now look at the ailerons. I'm going to rotate the control column to the right. You'll see the right wing go down, the left wing go up, and you can see the horizon is no longer level in the windscreen. However, in addition to the roll, we can see that the aircraft is yawing to the right. And if I relax the back pressure on the control column, the nose pitches down, and the aircraft enters what we describe as a spiral descent, losing height, gaining speed. And of course, the same will occur when I rotate the control column to the left. To bring the wings level, control column left, and there we are, wings level again. Let's now look at the effects of the rudder. I'm now going to press the left rudder pedal. Check that we're clear first of all. So left rudder pedal, you can see the nose yaws to the left, the aircraft rolls to the left, and eventually enters the spiral dive to the left. And the same will occur when I press the right rudder pedal. Wings level now, and there we are, returned again to straight and level. Let's now have a look at the effects of power. I'm now going to increase to full power, and note what happens to the nose position relative to the horizon. Here we go. Full power is being applied. Note the nose of the aircraft pitches up and yaws and rolls to the left. Returning the aircraft back to straight and level flight, we'll then have a look at what happens when we reduce the power. So here we are again, straight and level. I'm going to reduce the power. Note the nose of the aircraft pitches down, yaws and rolls to the right, and recovering back to straight and level flight. Good, so that's the effects of the power. And now on this aircraft, let's have a look at the effects of flap. Here we are again, straight and level 2,000 feet within the flap limiting range. I'm selecting one stage of flap, and note what happens to the nose of the aircraft. 1, 2, 3, a very abrupt change in attitude, nose pitches up. Returning the aircraft back to straight and level flight. 2,200 feet. What happens when I reduce the flap? Flap now going up, 1, 2, 3, and likewise the nose pitches down. So when we change power, or when we change the flap position, we must be aware of what effect this has on the aircraft, be ready for it, and move the control column accordingly in order to maintain the aircraft in exactly the same condition we require it to be in.
Straight and level flight. In order to fly the aircraft straight, we first of all select a reference point towards which we'll fly. We keep the wings level with the horizon using aileron. We keep the aircraft in balance using the rudder. If the ball were to the right, right rudder will be required. Ball to the left, left rudder will be required to bring the ball back to the center. To fly the aircraft level, we need first of all to select the level flight power, combined with the correct level flight attitude, and that's the distance between the spinner and the horizon. Now, as long as the power is set correctly, and the attitude is set correctly, and the aircraft is in trim, the aircraft will maintain level flight, which can be confirmed by reference with the altimeter.
Okay, we're now going to look at straight and level flight. Let's divide this into two. First of all, level flight. To fly the aircraft level, two requirements. First, the level flight power, correctly set. Second, the level flight attitude. You can see where the horizon is cutting through the windscreen. That's the position in this aircraft for level flight. If I were to select slightly too low a nose attitude, you can see the horizon climbing in the windscreen, the nose pointing towards the ground, and we begin to lose height. If I have slightly too high a nose attitude, the converse happens, the aircraft begins to climb. So neither this attitude nor that too low a nose attitude is correct, because we know that at this power setting, That is the correct level flight attitude. Alright, let's now talk about straight flight. To fly the aircraft straight, again, 2 requirements. The first one, to keep the wings level. It's no use having the wings like that, we'll turn. So we've got to keep the wings level to the horizon. And the second requirement is to keep the aircraft in balance. That little black ball needs to be kept central. Now, to confirm that we're flying straight, select a reference point. And if you look ahead, I'll just lower the nose so you can see it. I've got a beautiful chimney in view. And as long as that chimney remains in my 12 o'clock position, I know that I'm flying straight. Further confirmed, of course, by looking at the directional gyro indicator to confirm that we are maintaining the heading we require. So, in a nutshell, that's flying straight and level.
Now let's look at the climb. To enter a climb, having completed the pre-climb checks, including a thoroughly good lookout, we'll apply full power, select the known climbing attitude, which in this aircraft is with the spinner just above the horizon. We'll maintain that climb attitude, assuming the speed has settled back to the speed we require of 80 knots, and we will trim. Now during the climb, if the speed is too high, we'll select a slightly higher nose attitude, and if the speed is too low, we'll select a slightly lower nose attitude. So during the climb, speed will be controlled by the attitude that we select against the visual horizon. Now to recover from the climb, just as we had a set procedure of entry to the climb of power, attitude, trim, the recovery back to straight and level flight is attitude, power and trim. In other words, we'll reselect the level flight attitude, allow the airspeed to increase to the required cruising speed, reduce the power back to the cruise power known for that aircraft, and then a final trim, which should be a slight trim forward movement. So back to straight level flight.
Our aim now is to learn to climb the aircraft at 80 knots in a constant direction from one level to another. Now the airmanship prior to the climb, look out, behind, all around the aircraft and in particular above the aircraft. Check the engine gauges are in the green, the altimeter setting set correctly. So here we go. Power, attitude, trim. Smoothly apply full power with a squeeze of right rudder to maintain the aircraft in balance, and select the known climbing attitude for 80 knots, which in this aircraft is there, the spinner resting just beneath the horizon. Look to the airspeed indicator and you will see the speed has settled at 80 knots, our correct climbing speed. Now to recover from the climb, the procedure is the opposite. We're going to reselect the level flight attitude, followed by selection of power, followed by trim. So here we are, climbing up to 2,000 feet. And as we approach the required altitude, I reselect the level flight attitude, hold the attitude as the speed increases, reselect the level flight power, which we knew before to be 2,000 RPM, maintain the attitude, and trim. Attitude, power, trim.
So we've looked at climbing, let's now have a look at descending the aircraft. In order to descend the aircraft, it's first of all very important that we have a thoroughly good lookout beneath the aircraft. Having done that, a set procedure follows. First of all, reduce the power, close the throttle completely, having first of all selected the carburetor heat to hot, maintain the level flight attitude as the airspeed reduces, and just before we reach the known gliding speed, which in this aircraft is 80 knots, we will reselect the known descent attitude. That's the distance between the spinner and the horizon, the descent attitude. Having selected the correct attitude, the aircraft should descend at the correct speed. We will then trim the aircraft. Now, if the speed is too low, we'll select a slightly lower nose attitude. If the speed is slightly too high, we'll select a slightly higher nose attitude. So during the descent, speed is controlled by attitude. You will notice the rate of descent settles at about 700 feet a minute. To recover from the descent, we will reselect the level flight power. As the speed increases, reselect the level flight attitude, hold the attitude back to the straight and level attitude we saw earlier, and then retrim the aircraft. Now, as far as controlling the rate of descent is concerned, we have access to the flaps and we have access to the power. Let's first of all talk about the flaps. When I lower the flaps, you will notice that to maintain the same speed, I require a lower nose attitude. There will be a bigger gap between the spinner and the horizon, better view forward.
When we raise the flaps, we'll need a higher nose attitude to maintain the same speed. So the use of flaps will be particularly good, if you like, when we come to actually landing the aircraft, a better view forward. Now finally, the power. Obviously more power means a slightly higher nose attitude to maintain the same speed, less power, a slightly lower nose attitude. So the power will have a direct effect on our rate of descent, which you'll see later. Speed still controlled by attitude.
Descending. Our aim now is to glide the aircraft at 80 knots in a constant direction and to level off at a selected altitude. Carburetor air hot, lookout completed. Throttle now slowly but completely closed with a squeeze of left rudder to maintain balance. Airspeed reducing to 80 knots. Note we're maintaining the attitude initially. And just before we reach 80 knots, reselect the known descent attitude to maintain 80 knots. And there we are establishing the descent with a new attitude. Note the new position of the horizon in the windscreen. Airspeed being controlled by attitude. If we're slightly too fast, we select a slightly higher nose attitude. Slightly too slow, we select a slightly lower nose attitude. So during the descent, our airspeed has been controlled by the attitude we select. We're now going to level off at 1500 feet. So, within 200 feet of the required altitude, carburetor air to cold, 100 feet to go, smoothly reapply power and reselect the known level flight attitude. And there we have it. See the new, or rather the old position of the horizon back in the windscreen. Good, so let's now look at the effects of power in the descent. Once again, I've reduced the power, airspeed reducing to 80 knots, and reselected the attitude for the 80 knot glide descent. I'm now going to increase the power to 1500 RPM. To maintain the airspeed at 80 knots, I need to select a slightly higher nose attitude. Still descending at 80 knots, but the rate of descent is reduced. I'm now increasing the power to 18 to 1900 RPM, still maintaining 80 knots. But note now the rate of descent has completely disappeared. The aircraft is now flying level. And if I were to select full power and maintain 80 knots, we'd of course be back in our climbing attitude. So we can see from this that the airspeed is controlled by attitude, but the rate of descent is being controlled by the power. Useful information for when we come to the circuit. All right, very quickly, I'm putting the aircraft back into the glide descent. Good lookout beforehand, 80 knots. Let's now look at the effects of flap. I'm now selecting flap down to 20 degrees. To maintain the speed with the increased drag, I'm having to select a lower nose attitude. Airspeed being controlled by attitude, but rate of descent now has been significantly affected by the flaps. And can you see how our forward visibility is so much improved? Imagine a runway in front of us now, much easier to see. Look where the horizon is cutting through the windscreen, very, very high in the windscreen. Now to reduce the rate of descent, again I can increase the power. So power is still offsetting the rate of descent, but I'm primarily controlling the airspeed by small and careful adjustments of attitude.
Well, we don't only fly in straight lines. Sometimes we have to turn the aircraft. And prior to every turn, it is essential to have a thoroughly good lookout. Now to enter the turn, we will simply rotate the control column in the direction of turn to set up the bank angle required for the turn, return the control column back to the neutral position, apply a gentle amount of back pressure to prevent the aircraft from descending during the turn, and apply a squeeze of rudder in the direction of turn to maintain the aircraft in balance. And that's the picture you will probably see on a turn to the right. Now during the turn, we maintain the bank angle at 30 degrees, sufficient back pressure to sustain level flight, and a squeeze of rudder as necessary to keep the aircraft in balance. To recover from the turn, the opposite. Control column back in the opposite direction, wings level, relaxing the back pressure back to the level flight attitude, and adjusting the rudder pressure just as necessary to keep again the aircraft in balance.
Medium level turns. Our aim now is to turn the aircraft in level flight onto selected headings using 30 degrees of bank. So, lookout completed. Rotate the control column in the direction you wish to turn to select a bank angle of 30 degrees. As you approach the 30-degree bank angle, gentle back pressure, selecting a slightly higher nose attitude, and there we are established in the turn. So, 3 B's to check. Bank angle, back pressure,
and balance, confirming the aircraft remains in balance with a small amount of rudder in the direction of turn. During the turn, continue to maintain a good lookout, check the nose attitude, the position of the nose against the horizon, and check the instruments. To complete the turn, we simply rotate the control column in the opposite direction, relaxing the back pressure, a squeeze of left rudder in opposite direction to the turn we've just done, and reselecting the straight and level attitude. Let's now look at a turn to the left. Good lookout, rotate the control column to the left, rudder in the direction of the turn, reselecting the 30-degree bank angle, a slight raising of the nose attitude to maintain level flight, and once again the 3 Bs. Bank angle correct at 30 degrees. Back pressure, sufficient back pressure to maintain level flight, and balance, ball in the middle. During the turn, look out, attitude, and instruments. And to recover from this turn, rotating the control column in the opposite direction to the right, a squeeze of right rudder this time, and reselecting the straight and level attitude, relaxing the back pressure we previously held. The medium level turn.
Let's now put together all those lessons we've learnt, climbing, descending, turning, straight and level, into the circuit. This is the name we give to the path that the aircraft will fly at and around the runway. First of all, the climb-out path. Before we turn, a thoroughly good lookout, and we then turn the aircraft onto what is known as the crosswind leg, climbing to our circuit height of 800 feet. At this point here, again, a very good lookout, in particular towards the downwind, make sure no aircraft is joining downwind, and we then turn onto the downwind leg. The downwind leg is the location where we will do our pre-landing checks. We make our downwind call when abeam the upwind end of the runway. When we reach the downwind end of the runway, we look towards the runway to an angle of approximately 45 degrees from the runway, at which point we turn onto the base leg. The base leg, an important part of the circuit, a busy part of the circuit, where we complete our checks, descending the aircraft to the height at which we turn on to final approach, 500 to 600 feet. Turning on to final approach, and thereafter controlling the approach accurately with both power and attitude down to the landing. And this part we call the finals.
We've completed the pre-takeoff checks, we look towards final approach, and we advise air traffic we're ready for departure.
Golf Delta Yankee ready for departure.
Golf Delta Yankee, line up and hold 04.
Line up and hold 04 Delta Yankee.
The approach is clear, the runway is clear, and we now taxi to the threshold. As we do so, note the wind direction by looking at the windsock, straight down the runway. No crosswind to affect us.
Golf Delta Yankee ready for departure.
Golf Delta Yankee, clear takeoff runway 04, surface wind 04, 0 degrees 18 knots.
Golf Delta Yankees clear takeoff runway 04.
Fine, takeoff checks completed. We're now ready for departure. We've been given takeoff clearance. Check first of all that the runway is clear. Select a reference point in the distance to which to aim. Check the DI against the compass. Engine gauge is in the green and power to 2000 RPM. Gauge is remaining in the green. Reference point in view. Brakes release, heels on the floor, and smoothly apply full power. Check we have full power, 2200 RPM indicated. Check the gauges are remaining in the green, and they are. And check the airspeed is increasing. It is. And at 65 knots, positive movement back on the control column into the attitude for the climb. And there we are, immediately selecting the safe climbing attitude, climbing away at our normal climbing speed of 80 knots. Positively airborne, brakes on off, stop the wheel spinning, recheck the engine gauges, maintain the climbing attitude, and check that your reference point is remaining in the 12 o'clock position, such that you do maintain the runway extended centre line. First turn will take place at 500 feet, and just before 500 feet, a good lookout to the right, ahead, to the left, and behind. Clear, and entering a turn, 15 degrees of bank, onto the crosswind heading. All the time maintaining a thoroughly good lookout. Good clear horizon today. We're going to be levelling off at 800 feet, which is the circuit height here at Cranfield, on a crosswind heading that takes us at right angles to the extended runway. Here we are, 800 feet approaching, still in the turn, but no problem. Reselecting the level flight attitude, allowing the airspeed to increase to our circuit speed of 90 knots, reselecting the level flight power, and trimming. Now once the tailplane has cut through the extended centerline, that's the time to turn onto the downwind, and here we go. Turning onto the downwind heading.
Number 1. 50 number 1. 50 further traffic out to your right will be a Cessna joining left base of 0.
Turning onto the downwind heading, which should take us parallel to the runway with the wingtip trailing down the middle of the runway. So downwind call.
Golf Delta Yankees downwind left hand for 04.
Delta Yankee, watching number 2 behind the Cessna on left base for 04, and there's a rally at your left landing on the grass.
Rally inside Delta Yankee.
Okay, downwind check 7, brakes check off, pedal pressure under the feet, the mixture is rich, the fuel is on, the flaps are up, the altimeters are set, height, heading and airspeed. Now when the runway makes good an angle of 45 degrees to the wing, that's the time to turn onto our base leg. So, a good look right, a good look ahead, a good look left and behind, and a left level turn, 30 degrees of bank, note the position of the horizon in the windscreen, onto our base leg heading. And there we are, just completing the turn now, bringing the wings gently level, checking that the heading we've chosen is a good one. Selecting carburetor heat hot, reducing the power to our descent power, and selecting 2/3 of flap as the airspeed decays to 80 knots. Note the new attitude. This is the 80 knot attitude with 2/3 of flap and the power set. Note the new position of the horizon in the windscreen. As I look to the right, check that we are clear on final approach, no one joining on an extended final. Looking now towards the runway, and I now commence the left-hand turn onto final approach, checking runway, airspeed, runway, airspeed, runway, airspeed. And as I complete the turn, 3 things to check: heading, perspective, and speed. Finals call.
We've now turned onto final approach, and this is the picture we want to see. The heading is good, we're lined up with the runway centerline. The perspective is good, the numbers remaining fixed in that position. And most importantly, the speed is good. Heading, perspective, and speed. Now, if we're too high, that's the picture we'll see. It will be as if we're looking down on top of the runway. The numbers will be low in the windscreen, possibly even obscured by the spinner. Too high an approach. If we're too low, this is the picture we'll see. Numbers sitting high in the windscreen, a much plainer perspective. It will almost be as if we're driving down the runway rather than flying above it. Too high, reduce the power, lower the nose attitude to maintain the speed. Too low, increase the power, raise the nose attitude to maintain the speed. But throughout all the approaches, checking heading, perspective, and speed.
Golf Delta Yankee, finals, full stop, 04.
Golf Delta Yankees, cleared land 04, the wind 05 degrees 18 knots.
Delta Yankee, cleared land 04.
All right, so final approach established, the speed is good. Selecting full flap now for the landing, and continuing to check our 3 requirements. Is the heading correct? Yes, it is, in line with the runway. Is the perspective good? Yes, it is. Is the airspeed correct? Yes, the airspeed is correct. So continually thinking heading, perspective, speed. And if you look through the windscreen, you'll see the numbers remaining fixed in that position. We have a displaced threshold here at Cranfield, so we'll be landing beyond those 2 arrows. Heading good, perspective good, and airspeed good. All right, just going a little bit fast now, so just selecting a slightly higher nose attitude and reducing the power to maintain the rate of descent. Heading's good, perspective and airspeed. Heading, perspective and airspeed. As we come closer to the runway, now comes the important part, the landing.
And now we come to probably the most demanding part of the course, the landing. Here you can see the aircraft on the final stages of its final approach. This is the picture as seen by the pilot from the cockpit. Approximately the height of a double-decker bus, the pilot brings the aircraft towards a level flight attitude, slowly but completely closing the throttle, keeping the aircraft flying just 1 foot above the runway centerline, keeping it flying, keeping it flying, keeping it flying, moving into the landing attitude. The main wheels touch, followed gently by the nose wheel, gentle braking and bringing the aircraft to a stop. It sounds simple, but a lot of practice will be needed.
As we come closer to the runway, now comes the important part, the landing. I'm going to bring the aircraft to a position where it's flying level with the runway surface, approximately 1 foot above, as I now slowly but completely close the throttle, keeping the aircraft flying, 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 keeping her flying, 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 and down. Main wheels first, followed by the nose wheel. There we go. So let's examine now, when we're too high or too low on the approach, the views that we see. So this is what it's like when we're too low. Notice the threshold is sitting high in the windscreen. The nose is a long way below the threshold, indicating that we are too low. Now what I'm going to do is to maintain height, and we will slowly, progressively reapproach the ideal glide slope. Note the new perspective of the runway as we become higher relative to that ideal glide slope. Taking on a much more planned perspective as the runway threshold works its way down the windscreen towards the spinner. Try and work out for yourself where you think the correct position is, and I will tell you. Not quite. Just about there. And there we have it, the correct or ideal 3-degree approach path that we're aiming to maintain. However, I'm going to maintain height still, and you'll notice we're now becoming high on the approach. The threshold and the numbers, if you can see them, are working their way down to the bottom of the windscreen and are shortly to become obscured by the spinner. And in this position, we are too high and obviously wouldn't be able to make it. If we were to close the power, there wouldn't be sufficient room for us to land on the runway available. Let me just lower the nose so you can see the runway clearly and see how high we are relative to it. So nothing else to do except to go around.
Following a period of practicing circuits and landings, the student is sent on their first solo. This is a unique moment, never to be forgotten, as this student recalls.
Well, they were good, Jim. No problems there.
Thank you.
Happy to go on your own now?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. No problems?
No?
Fine.
I'll never forget my first solo. They say there are a few things in life that you can't repeat, and this has got to be one of them. For the first time in my life, I felt entirely alone. At the end of the last circuit, my instructor turned to me and said, "Okay, it's time for one on your own." I'll always remember the experience. I think I sang halfway around the circuit. It seemed to last so much longer than the previous ones. In a strange way, my instructor was still sitting beside me, but he wasn't. It all went like clockwork. By the time it came to the final approach, I knew I'd hacked it. Speed good, approach angle good. The flare and the landing, though I say it myself, was one of the best I'd ever done. Nope, I'll never forget that moment.
How was it?
Marvellous.
Excellent. It was a good landing.
Before you go solo, you will also have dealt with various simulated emergencies, including forced landings, cockpit fires, electrical failure, and engine failures after takeoff. You will have also looked at the stall. So, let's now look at the clean stall and its recovery.
Now, flying isn't only about getting from A to B as quickly as possible. Sometimes we have to fly slowly. So it's important that we appreciate the problems of slow flight and the stall. Now, prior to this exercise, we will carry out what we call the Hazel checks. Do we have sufficient height for the exercise? Is the airframe in the correct configuration? Are we secure in our seats, no loose articles? Is the engine in a happy condition, all gauges in the green? Are we in the correct location? And have we carried out a thorough lookout, in particular beneath the aircraft? Assuming we have done those checks and we're happy with them, we go for slow flight. We close the throttle, and as the airspeed reduces, we find we have to select a higher and higher nose attitude in order to maintain level flight. We may notice a stall warning horn, buffet, and also a sloppiness of controls. To recover from this situation, we simply move the control column forward, simultaneously applying full power to bring the aircraft back to straight and level flight. But if we don't take recovery at this point, what can happen? We then go on to the stall. Now, the stall is a condition where the angle of attack has reached such a point where we see airflow disturbed over the back of the wing, causing the lift to be reduced, the drag to significantly increase. A condition where the angle of attack is such that there is insufficient lift to support the weight of the aircraft, and this we call the stall. It may result in nose drop followed by wing drop, and as a consequence we must take recovery action. And the recovery action by coincidence is exactly the same as for slow flight, namely control column forward, full power, rudder this time to prevent further yaw, again to bring the aircraft back into a situation where the airflow is flowing smoothly over the wing.
Stall recovery. Our aim here is to learn to recognise the symptoms of an approaching stall and to recover with the minimum loss of height. So, we've completed the Hazel checks, carburetor heat to hot, throttle slowly but completely close, a squeeze of left rudder to maintain balance, airspeed reducing. Note the new position of the nose against the horizon, controls more sloppy. 70 knots we hear the stall warner horn, carburetor heat to cold. Little bit of buffet over the controls, 65 knots, and the nose nods, the aircraft stalls, recover full power, rudder to prevent further yaw, airspeed increasing, and reselecting the safe climbing attitude to recover out of the stall. Returning back to our previous altitude, 3,500 feet. And once you get there, reselect the level flight attitude, back into straight level flight.
And now a view of the stall from the wingtip. Speed reducing, attitude increasing, flying controls losing their bite, aircraft stalled, recover, control column forward, full power, speed safe, and back into the climb. Let's now see the instrument indications of another stall. Speed reducing, increasing nose attitude, controls losing effectiveness, buffet, nose drop followed by wing drop, a rapid loss in height, a high rate of descent as we take recovery action.
So what happens when the engine fails, or we have a similar problem that causes us to make a forced landing? Well, the first thing we must do is establish the aircraft in the correct gliding attitude, at the correct gliding speed. Look then for a field, suitable size, sensible shape, good surroundings, and a good surface, and most importantly, into wind. Now, assuming the field meets those requirements, and it won't always, it's then time to plan the circuit around the field, plan the approach. On the downwind leg of the field, probably starting at around about 2,000 feet, go through the restart checks, see if you can find the cause of failure and restart the engine. Make the mayday call, clearly, sensibly, so that air traffic control can get the facilities to you in time. As you reach about this point, approximately 1,000 feet above ground level, you'll be just approaching the beginning of the base leg. Then is time to do the shutdown checks, make the aircraft safe and secure for the eventual touchdown. Now is also the time to decide whether you're too high and need to do some S-turns or steer away from the field, or even use some flap. Or, if you're too low, to steer into the field and delay any use of flap. Once established on final approach, again, make the decision. Are you too high or are you too low for the approach? Should you use flap? Should you make more S-turns? The aim being, of course, to land to 1/3 to a halfway into the field, but bringing that landing position closer to you with the use of flap. Very, very important, a safe and accurate control of the correct approach speed on final approach. remembering to ensure a safe main wheel landing onto a surface that you may not be familiar with.
And now the forced landing without power. Our aim here is to learn to land the aircraft safely in the event of a total loss of power. So, without more ado, let's simulate this. Carburetor heat hot, throttle completely closed. Practice, practice, we have an engine failure simulated. Maintaining the level flight attitude, airspeed at 80, our glide descent, speed, and reselecting the known descent attitude. Looking for a field? Well, 5 S's: size, surface, slope, shape, and surroundings. And there we have it to our left, a perfect field. Turning left now onto a crosswind, we need to be at least 2,000 feet by the time we start our downwind leg. How's it looking? Oh, not too bad. So, checks, cause of failure. The fuel is on, the mixture is rich, the magnetos are on, the carburetor heat is hot, the fuel pump is on. Cause of failure cannot be determined. So, mayday call, mayday, mayday, mayday. Luton approach, this is Golf, November, Oscar Delta Yankee. Total engine failure, intention forced landing, position over Cheddington, level passing 1900 feet, heading 290 degrees. Private pilot's license, 1 POB. So, good look around all the time, maintaining the orientation, maintaining the lookout as we turn onto our downwind heading, downwind of the field that we've chosen. The field is into wind, it's a good shape, it's a good length. All the time being very careful to maintain that airspeed. Now, because this is a practice, I'm just going to warm the engine and throttle slowly closed. All right, we've done the cause of failure checks, we've done the mayday call. The final checks to go are the shutdown checks. So, simulated only, throttle closed, mixture idle cutoff, fuel off, fuel pump off, magnetos off, canopy crack open. Looking at the field all the time, keep the field in sight, never lose sight of the field, as we now turn onto our base leg for the field. Trying to make this as close as possible to a normal glide approach that we would do back at our departure aerodrome. Here we are then, on a left base, shortly turning towards final approach. Are we too high? Yes, we are. So we're going to select some flap at this stage. Flap, as you know, will increase the rate of descent. Still maintaining the speed very carefully at the right speed, looking towards the field now. 80 knots, looking good, looking good. Just beginning to note the effects of the wind a little bit better now. As we come down towards base leg, everything's looking good, checking towards final approach, remembering this is a practice, so we will not be overshooting below 500 feet above ground level. As we turn on to final approach now, a little bit of turbulence. Around about 700 to 800 feet above ground level at this moment, looking good. Yes, we're definitely going to get in there, so advise the passengers, simulated, brace yourselves, seat as far back as possible and harness as tight and as secure as possible. Definitely into the field. No problem at all. There we are, 500 feet above ground level and going around. The PPL is not only about practicing various maneuvers with an instructor, it's also about consolidating all those exercises that you do with him on your own. This builds confidence and expertise. Your hours will be built up in practicing general handling and emergencies, circuit work, dual and solo cross countries, and dual instrument flying.
We're now going to look at instrument flying. To fly the aircraft accurately on instruments is not easy. And for the purpose, we have 6 main instruments: airspeed indicator, attitude indicator, altimeter, vertical speed indicator, direction indicator, and turn coordinator. The attitude indicator shows us pitch up, pitch down, roll right, roll left. The airspeed indicator shows us speed, and therefore is an indirect indication as to whether the aircraft is pitched down, speed increasing, or pitched up, speed reducing. Turn coordinator shows us yaw, shows us roll, and shows us whether or not the aircraft is in balance. The DI, you remember, shows us heading. The altimeter shows us height, but also, if the altimeter is increasing, may be an indirect indication to pitch, i.e. a pitch up. If it were reducing, may be an indirect indication to pitch or pitch down. The vertical speed indicator will show us rate of climb or rate of descent, and also, again, is an indirect indication as to pitch. Now, by setting up a sensible scan of these instruments, we should be able to fly the aircraft accurately using just those instruments, with no reference to the outside world.
So let's now have a brief look at instrument flying. So you can see now that we're flying level, 2,500 feet, neither climbing nor descending, on a heading of due north, at an airspeed of 100 knots this time. The aircraft's in balance and the wings are level. So let's have a very brief look at what each of these instruments shows us. First of all, the attitude indicator. You can see from the attitude indicator that the aircraft is presently flying level. If it were in this position, that's what we call a climbing attitude, and you can see the altimeter showing a climb, the vertical speed indicator an increase in height, and the airspeed indicator a reduction in speed. With the nose in this position, that's the low nose attitude, the opposite occurs. The altimeter shows a reduction in height, the VSI shows a descent, and the airspeed shows an increase in speed. And as we approach or reapproach 2,500 feet, I'm going to reselect the level flight attitude, like so, and the aircraft stops descending. To turn the aircraft, simply rotating the control column to the left, you can see the left wing is pointing towards the ground, as depicted by the attitude indicator, the right wing towards the sky. And we're established in a turn to the left, which can be witnessed by the DI showing the turn to the left. Still flying level, this time at 2,550 feet, and still flying at 96 knots. And wings level again.
One of the real pleasures of flying is navigating, seeing new places, visiting new airfields, new countries. Well, today it's not a new country, but it's a simple navigation exercise from Coventry to Cranfield. Now, if there was no wind, it would be a simple procedure of steering the track heading, and the aircraft will follow that track line all the way to Cranfield. But, as we know, we've studied the wind charts today, and there is in fact a wind from the northeast. This means that rather than steering the track heading, we must steer a small amount into wind, laying off what we call drift, in order to maintain that track. Now, to confirm that we're maintaining that track, we need to map read, using the map in conjunction with the ground features that we see to confirm that we are indeed following that track line across the ground and making adjustments if we're not. Well, you can see the aircraft is just approaching the town of Olney. To confirm that that is Olney, we check with the map and we see that there should be a disused railway running to the north, a couple of A roads running in from the northeast, a river to the south and a lake to the south. And as long as we can see these features on the ground, in the right position, at the right time when we expect them, we can confirm our position to be exactly where we should be, i.e. just to the west of Olney.
Let's now have a look at the planning for our cross-country. Travelling from one place to another is probably the main reason for learning to fly. And today we shall be flying from Coventry to Cranfield. We simply draw a line between the two airfields like so. The distance is measured using the ruler. The track is measured at the centre of the line using the protractor. If it wasn't for wind, we could simply steer that measured angle. With the Dalton calculator, or computer, we can work out very simply the heading to steer, allowing for the wind today, and the ground speed, and therefore the time it will take us to complete the journey. During your flying training, you will have several hours of dual and solo practice in finding your way around the country with the help of the topographical map. Passing Olney, we can now see the disused railway running west to east to the north of the town, the main road running north-south, and the river and lake to the southeast. At least 3 items should be used to positively confirm your position. If your aircraft's track differs from that required, it may be for the following reasons. You're flying on a heading different from that calculated. You're flying at a different true airspeed than was used to calculate that heading. Your calculations are in error. The wind is different from that forecast. Some skill is needed in altering headings, using fixes, amending ETAs, and using the map to its best advantage. Use those ground features sensibly. What features can you see to the left of the aircraft? Time to complete our field approach checks and prepare the aircraft for landing. Fuel on, fuel pump on, radios set, engine gauges checked, DI align with compass. Altimeters set, QFE number 1, QNH number 2. Joining instructions in preparation for the final approach and the landing.
Golf Delta Yankee, Cranfield Tower, clear to land runway 04, surface wind 04 Z degrees at 18 knots.
Good navigators are made, they're not born. It takes several hours of practice before you will feel entirely confident on your own, and never be afraid to admit that you're lost to air traffic control. Upon arrival at the destination aerodrome, you will need to book in, either on the radio or at the booking in point where you see the large black letter C against a yellow background. During your navigation, avoid jumping to conclusions or altering your heading unless you're certain that a change is justified. It is rare that you'll ever be far off track. Every flying lesson is preceded by a pre-flight briefing with your instructor and is followed by a post-flight briefing so you fully understand the theory of the lesson. In addition to the actual flying training, there are a series of fairly simple ground examinations that you will need to sit prior to the issue of your licence. Ground school, including your pre- and post-flight briefings, plus individual or group tutorials, will be required, leading to exams in air law, airplane general knowledge, flight performance and planning, and human performance and limitations. The minimum flying course comprises 45 hours flying, 10 hours solo, of which 5 is spent navigating, 25 hours dual, 5 of which will be spent flying with sole reference to the instruments.
Well, it seems a somewhat daunting task at the beginning, but once you've achieved the PPL, literally, the sky is the limit. The licence is indeed recognised worldwide, and a whole new world of possibilities opens up, whether for fun flying, with family or friends, for business, or even the start of an aviation career. It's the first step in a continuing adventure, the adventure of learning to fly.
Clear prop!